My mother was 71 years old when she died, and she died the way she had lived. Quietly, without making a fuss, without leaving much of a mess for anyone else to deal with. That was very much her way. She'd already arranged her own funeral, prepaid it years before, had a binder on the kitchen shelf with every document anyone could possibly need, labeled in her handwriting with a black Sharpie. Death certificates go here. RSP information. Her lawyer's number circled twice. She had thought of everything. Or so I thought. I got the call from the real estate agent 11 weeks after the funeral. Her name was Patricia, and she was professional and kind in the way the people in her line of work learned to be with grieving families. She said the inspection had gone well. She said the house would show beautifully once we cleared out the personal items. She said there was just one thing. There's a room, she said. I assumed she meant the storage room off the back hallway. My mother had used it as a kind of overflow pantry. Christmas decorations, old tax files in banker's boxes, a bread maker she bought in 1998 and used exactly once. I told Patricia I knew about the room, that we'd have it cleared out by the end of the month. Not that one, she said, the one behind it. I had grown up in that house. I had lived there until I was 22 years old. I had climbed its stairs 10,000 times, had pressed my ear against its walls during thunderstorms, had hidden in every corner of it during games of hide-and-seek with my younger sister. I thought I knew every inch of it. I drove to Guelph that same afternoon. The house was a bricked two-story on a quiet street near the university, the kind of neighborhood where people had lived for 40 years and knew each other's dogs by name. My mother had moved there with my father in 1981, and after he left, I was 9, my sister was 6, she had stayed, raised us there alone. Worked the same job at the credit union for 31 years, went to the same church, made the same potato soup every November. I let myself in with the key from the lockbox Patricia had left, and I stood in the kitchen for a moment, just standing. The house still smelled like her. Ivory soap and the particular mustiness of old paperbacks. I had to breathe through it, just for a second. The storage room was off the back hallway past the bathroom, behind a door that had never had a lock on it. I'd been in there a dozen times since she passed, sorting through boxes, donating winter coats to the Sally Ann. I knew that room, but at the back of it, behind a shelving unit she'd had as long as I could remember, there was a door. It was not a big door. It was shorter than a standard door frame, the kind of door you'd have to duck slightly to pass through. It was painted the same cream color as the wall, and the shelving unit had been pushed flush against it, not blocking it entirely but positioned in a way that made the door almost invisible unless you were looking for it. A box of Christmas ornaments sat on the bottom shelf, a bag of old wool on the second. I had looked directly at that wall probably 100 times in my life and never seen it. I moved the shelving unit. The door had a simple handle, the old-fashioned kind, oval and brass and worn smooth at the thumb press from years of use. It was not locked. I turned the handle and the door swung inward into darkness. I found the light switch just inside the frame. It was a room. A real room, maybe 10 feet by 12, with a low ceiling and a single window that had been covered from the outside by a lattice panel and climbing vines, which is why I had never noticed it from the garden. The walls were painted a deep green, a color I'd never seen anywhere else in the house. There was a wooden desk pushed against the far wall, and on the desk there was a lamp, a coffee mug with a chip in the rim, and a typewriter. Not a computer, a typewriter. An Olivetti, dark gray, the kind from the late 70s. There was paper still fed into it. The last page she'd ever typed was still sitting there, midway through a sentence. I sat down in the chair, which was just an old wooden chair, nothing special, and I read what was on the page. It took me a long time to understand what I was reading. I should back up. My mother, and I say this with love, because it is true, and because she is gone and I can say things plainly now. My mother was not a woman who talked about herself. She answered questions when asked. She listened, genuinely and attentively, and she remembered everything you told her. But about herself, about her own interior life, her own longings and regrets and private history, she offered almost nothing. I had assumed, for most of my adult life, that she simply didn't have a great deal to say, that she was not that kind of person. I was wrong about that entirely. There were stacks of typed pages on a shelf above the desk, bundled with elastic bands and arranged in some order I couldn't immediately decode. The pages were not in folders or binders. They were loose, stacked in neat piles, dozens and dozens of them. Some of the paper had gone yellow at the edges. Some of the piles were thicker than others. I picked up the first pile and began to read. She had been writing since at least 1987. That was the date on the first page of what appeared to be the earliest batch. I say appeared because the organization of the piles was not chronological in any obvious way, and it took me several visits to the room, over several days, to begin to understand the shape of what she had made. But the date on that first page was September 1987. I was 15. My sister was 12. My father had been gone for 6 years. She wrote the way she spoke, in short, direct sentences, without a great deal of ornament. But what she wrote was nothing like how she spoke, because she wrote about everything she never said out loud. She wrote about being lonely. She wrote about missing my father, not the man he became, the man who left, but the man she had believed he was when they were young. She wrote about the particular exhaustion of raising 2 children alone while trying not to let them see that she was tired. She wrote about the credit union and the small politics of the office and a colleague she had found genuinely funny, a woman named Annette who died of ovarian cancer in 1994, and how much she had missed her. She wrote about us, about me and my sister, not the events of our childhoods. Those were barely in there, but her experience of watching us grow up, what it felt like from the inside to be our mother, what she worried about, what surprised her, what she was proud of that she never found the words to say. I read for 3 hours that first afternoon, and then I had to stop. I sat in that green room in the growing dark, with the lamp on and the typewriter in front of me and my mother's voice coming off every page, and I thought about the woman I thought I had known. I thought about all the Sunday dinners and all the phone calls and all the times I'd asked her how she was doing and she'd said fine, just fine, and I had believed her because it was easier to believe her. I came back the next day with my sister. I hadn't told her what I'd found. I hadn't been able to find the words on the phone. I just asked her to drive in from Hamilton, told her there was something at the house she needed to see. She stood in the doorway of that green room for a long time before she stepped inside. My sister is 2 years younger than me, and in many ways she took after our mother more than I did. The same quietness, the same way of going still when she was thinking hard about something. She picked up one of the bundles, looked at the date, set it back down. She looked at the typewriter. She looked at the chip in the coffee mug. Then she said, "How long has this been here?" That was the question I'd been trying to answer. The Olivetti looked like it was from the late 70s, which would put it around the time my parents first moved into the house. The paint on the walls, that particular deep green, had the quality of an older coat, slightly chalky, the way paint gets when it's been there a long time. The desk had a water ring on the surface, the kind that builds up over years of the same mug being set in the same spot. My best guess, and it remained only a guess, was that the broom had been here since before we were born. That my mother had arranged it herself at some point in her 20s and had been coming here ever since. For roughly 40 years. 40 years of typing pages that no one else would read. 40 years of closing a door behind her and being in some room of her own, simply herself. I don't know when she came here. Evenings, probably, after we were in bed. Weekends, maybe, when we were old enough to be left alone for an hour. I tried to remember the times in my childhood when I hadn't known where she was, when I had walked through the house calling her name and not found her immediately, and I couldn't retrieve those memories clearly. They were there, somewhere, the way all early memories are, vague and unreliable and suffused with a feeling I couldn't quite name. There was one bundle of pages that was different from the others. It was thicker, held together with a rubber band that had gone brittle and snapped when I tried to remove it carefully. These pages were not dated. They were not organized the way the others were. They were rougher, more like drafts, with words crossed out and written over. It took me a while to realize what they were. She had been writing a novel. Or trying to, at least. It was the story of a woman who emigrates from rural Ontario to the city in the 1960s, falls in love with a man she meets at a dance hall, marries him too quickly, and spends 20 years reckoning with that decision. The prose was not perfect. There were passages that were too long that lost the thread, that doubled back on themselves. But there were other passages, and I am not saying this because she was my mother. I'm saying this because I read them and felt them in my chest, that were genuinely, quietly beautiful. She had an eye for the small, true thing. The way light falls through a kitchen window in November. The particular loneliness of a Sunday afternoon. The way love can become habit without ever becoming less than love. I do not know if she knew the novel was good. I do not know if she ever thought about what it might have been, if she had done something different with her life, if someone had seen it. I do not know how she felt about having written it and then filed it away in rubber bands, in a room behind a shelf, in a house on a quiet street in Guelph, Ontario, where no one would find it until she was gone. There was no explanation left for us, no letter, no note. She had left the binder in the kitchen shelf with every practical document organized and labeled, but she had left nothing here except the work itself. Maybe she hadn't wanted to explain it. Maybe the explanation was in the pages and she trusted that we'd read them. Maybe she had simply never gotten around to writing it down. My sister and I spent the better part of a week in that house going through the pages together. We didn't read them out loud to each other. It didn't feel right, somehow, to do that. We'd each take a bundle and sit in the room or at the kitchen table or on the front porch in the afternoon and just read. Sometimes one of us would say something. Sometimes we wouldn't. There was a lot of silence that week. But it was a different kind of silence than the one we'd been living in since the funeral. I found one entry, from what I guessed was the mid-90s, that I keep coming back to. She was writing about me, about watching me come home from my first year at university, and how strange it was to see that I had changed without her witnessing the change. She wrote about standing at the kitchen window when I pulled into the driveway, and about the feeling she had in that moment, which she described as being proud of something she had only partly made. I had not known she stood at that window. I hadn't known she watched. We've talked about what to do with the pages, my sister and I. We've gone back and forth about it. There are people who would say the pages should stay private, that she kept them hidden for a reason, that publishing them or sharing them would be a violation of something she chose to keep for herself. There are other people who would say that what she made deserves to exist in the world, that she kept it hidden not because she wanted it gone, but because she didn't know how to offer it. I don't know which of those is right. I'm not sure anyone does. What I know is that I grew up with a woman I thought was simple, and I was wrong. What I know is that she had an entire interior life that she never showed me. That she was, in the room of her own choosing, someone richer and stranger and more feeling than the person who made my lunches and checked my homework, and sat quietly at the end of the day in the living room with a cup of tea. What I know is that she gave that life to the pages instead of to us, and I am still working out how I feel about that. The shelving unit is still in the storage room. I couldn't bring myself to get rid of it. Patricia eventually sold the house to a young couple, teachers, who were going to paint the main floor and put in new kitchen counters. I walked through it one last time before the sale went through, stood in that green room for a while, and then I left. I took the pages with me. All of them. They're in 2 banker's boxes in my home office now, next to my desk. I haven't decided what to do with them, and maybe I won't for a long time. But I read a few pages sometimes in the evenings when the house is quiet. It is the closest I have come in all my life to actually knowing her. I keep thinking about the chip in that coffee mug. Of all the things in that room, the typewriter, the stacks of pages, the novel she never finished, it's the chipped mug that stays with me. Because it tells me she sat there regularly enough to need a mug, comfortably enough to keep using one that was broken, long enough that she didn't think twice about it. My mother was not a woman who talked about herself. I understood that as a child and accepted it as an adult. And somewhere along the way, I made the mistake of confusing silence with emptiness. I thought she had nothing to say because she said nothing. That was wrong. She had 40 years worth of things to say. She just chose a different room to say them in. There's something I've had to sit with. The fact that I did not know her. Not fully. Not the way I assumed I did. And the honest response to that isn't grief exactly, though grief is part of it. It's more like a recalibration, a reminder that the people closest to us are still, in some essential way, separate from us, still carrying things we haven't been told, still becoming someone we haven't fully met. What she modeled, without ever naming it, was a kind of integrity I didn't have the eyes to see when she was alive. She didn't perform her inner life for anyone. She didn't need validation for the work she was doing in that green room. She sat down at that typewriter because it mattered to her, because it was true to something in her, and she did it for decades without any audience at all. That takes a quiet kind of moral seriousness that I think I underestimated in people who seem simple from the outside. And then there's the novel itself. Rough in places, yes, but not naive. She understood things about human nature that she never once expressed in conversation. She could see into a character's interior life with a precision and compassion that surprised me. That kind of understanding doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from paying attention over a long time, from sitting with hard feelings instead of moving away from them, from choosing, again and again, to look clearly at the world rather than away from it. That is something I want to carry forward, not just as a lesson about her, but as a standard for myself, to pay attention to the people I love more carefully than I think I need to not assume that the quiet ones have nothing going on, to make room in my own life for the things that matter to me even when no one else can see them. To keep going with something even when I'm not sure it will ever amount to anything. Because the doing of it is itself a kind of answer. The pages are still in the banker's boxes next to my desk. I haven't decided what to do with them. Maybe that decision will come eventually. Maybe it won't. But I read a few pages sometimes, in the evenings when the house is quiet. And I think about a woman sitting alone at a typewriter in a green room, doing the most honest thing she knew how to do, with no one watching at all. And I think that's the closest she ever came to telling me exactly who she was.